There were a lot of questions about cycling as transport. I guess if I've been that guy for so many years, I'm still going to be that guy a little bit longer. Fair enough. TJ in Finland was asking about bike share generally. It's a large topic, but I think it's really interesting to consider that the world's... I should do a quiz. Man, I should have made this a quiz, right? Where you could win something, but yeah. All right. Another idea for another day, right? The world's first bike share in the format that we know it today was in La Rochelle on the west coast of France. Sure, back in the 60s, there were some Dutch activists who painted a whole bunch of bikes white, saying that everybody should own the bikes. It should be a collective transport form. Cool. It lasted like 2 weeks. 1974, I believe, the mayor of La Rochelle, Michel Crépeau, legendary mayor in the urban context anywhere in the world, way ahead of his curve in the mid-70s, made pedestrian streets all over his city to the amazement of the rest of France. What are you doing, man? We got to build motorways. We got to build concrete. And he went, nah. He actually visited Copenhagen, saw the pedestrian streets. He says, I want to do that here in my town. But I was visiting La Rochelle back in like the early 90s, mid-90s maybe, and walking around. And there were these yellow bikes lined up, and you just handed in your driving license and you took the bike for the day and gave it back later on. It was free. It was super cool. Then we have to go to 1995, where it started here in Copenhagen, the system that we have seen in so many cities now around the world, where you take a bike and you put it back at another station. Back then, the bikes were super weird bikes, no parts that could be used on any other bikes. Designed for that purpose, so nobody stole them and whatnot. You just put a coin in, 10 or 20 kroner, like a shopping trolley, and you got the coin back when you dropped it off. I don't know of any locals who ever used them. It was really a tourist thing, a tourist gimmick. Copenhagen was the cultural capital of Europe in '96, so this was a part of the things that they did to welcome the rest of the world for the cultural capital year. But then from there, man, boom, it just exploded. Now there are well over 1,000 cities in the world who have a bike share system. Everything's been invented. We know the standards for best practice infrastructure. They were hammered out in the 1920s and 1930s in Denmark and the Netherlands. This was a really cool addition to the concept of bicycle urbanism. Nobody saw it coming, came out of nowhere, and it really exploded. What works? Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and I have worked on different projects as well in some cities regarding bike share. And I think that the system that started out, I think it really has proven to be the best system. Stations located conveniently, strategically throughout the city. Dense collection of stations. You know, you don't have to walk too far to find the next one or to drop off or pick up a bike. This shows that bicycles can be a transport form. Right? You have bus stops and train stations. That's where you get the bus or the train. I just think, personally, I think that that is the best system, where you have the stations. Because most of the people using bike share in cities are regular commuters, citizens of that city. So they know that that station's going to be there, and they go down and they pick up their bike, ride to the train station, ride to work, or get off a train, hop on one, last mile to their destination. That makes sense for me in a transport way of thinking. Then along came the floating bike share systems that we've seen a few places in the world, where with technology, with an app, you can find a bike nearby you, hop on it, and go off to wherever you need to go. I thought that was a nice idea when it appeared, but way before it really became a thing. In Germany, the German National Railways had one of the first systems of floating bike share. The bikes were just sort of strewn around, and you could find one and use a text message to open it up before smartphones. They found out pretty quick that it simply didn't work. So they started putting them in stations, I think as well. So you could park it in a station, or you could just leave it lying around somewhere like that. That really shows me that the docked system is the one that I think intuitively works better when you regard bicycles as a part of the public transport in a city. I have some personal issues with floating bike share systems. They're just left all over the place in our cities, in our neighborhoods. And here in Europe, especially in Southern Europe, but much more in Europe than in places like North America, public space is an important thing. Citizens protect it. They cherish their public space. And we've seen so much pushback against floating bike share systems in France And in Spain, simply vandalism by regular citizens, not even activists, just families going out going, that's, this is blocking our sidewalk. Elderly people can trip over it. It's a pedestrian hazard. And we've seen so much pushback in Europe about these systems. Less so in the US, where they hardly have any bikes in their cities. So some more bikes is a pretty cool thing, I think, is the general perception of it. But that love of public space, the respect for it, is something that is really unique to European cities. So I don't think the floating bike share system is very effective. If it's a part of a bigger established system of dock stations, fine. It might work in some cities, it might not in others. And then you have the challenge of established bicycle cities. Copenhagen's gimmicky bike share system from 1995, that disappeared, they phased it out, and they got a new one. And I have been very, very critical of the new system ever since it started. It's the world's most expensive bike share system. Your average bike share bike, like in Paris or New York, costs about $400, maybe $400 to $600 per bike when you buy them in bulk. The bikes here cost over $3,000, and you can push that up to $10,000 with maintenance over a period of about 8 or 10 years. It's incredibly expensive. So it has proven to be a massive flop. Racks are empty all over this city, and this is my taxpayer money at play, so that irritates me even more. The Dutch have a totally different system, one that is not really transferable to other places. It's an A to A system, so you get a bike at a station, you use it for a day or 2 or 3, and very inexpensive as well, and you drop it back where you picked it up. Dutch railways are trying to discourage bicycles on trains, so they have developed this system at all the train stations in the Netherlands. It works pretty cool in the Dutch context. Here in Denmark, the Danish State Railways, they have no problem with bikes on trains. They have refitted so many of our regional trains here in Greater Copenhagen to accommodate bikes with one-way systems on and off with bike racks on board. There were plans at some point for having bike pumps on the train as well, so you're going to sit there and commute. You might as well just pump your tires up. So 2 different ways of thinking. The Dutch A to A system I think is really great, and it works for them really well. I think it would work less here. We have less population density, fewer train stations. We're a bit bigger country with fewer people living in it per square kilometer. So I don't know if that's really a transferable model to anywhere in the world, but it works great for the Dutch, and that's cool. The floating bike share system with the pedestrian hazards and the private exploitation of public space, which irritates me to no end. It's the same with electric scooters. They're strewn all over the place in cities around the world, and now we're starting to see cities reeling them in, right? Milan, I think it was maybe just late last year, Milan pulled all 7 operators off the streets and said, whoa, we have to wait a bit. We have to think about this because this is chaotic. So many problems with them around the world. And again, in Europe, a lot of pushback because of this perception of public space as being, public, and private companies from another country just slapping them all over the place is not really acceptable. It's really interesting to see what bike share systems really, really work and try to figure out the patterns that make them work. You have cities like Dublin, Oslo, Helsinki, and then the big ones like Paris and Barcelona where the bike share systems have been very, very successful. Certainly Paris for me has been one of the best systems in the world. Absolute carpet bombing the city with bikes, 20,000 at its peak. Less now since they've had some delivery problems with renewing the bikes and buying a whole new fleet, but it still is and has been one of the best systems in the world. Then there's the question of who are they for? Some cities took a radical approach. Barcelona, I think Seville as well. Only for locals is what they said. And a lot of people are critical of that, saying, oh, they should be available to everybody. I kind of get it because Barcelona is a massive tourism city. They suffer from over-tourism. And bike share bikes are something that a lot of tourists use if they are easy and accessible and inexpensive as well. So Barcelona said, no, we're going to just keep them for the locals. The tourists can rent their bikes. There was some lobbying from bike shops and bike rental shops in Barcelona that might have played into it. Only the locals can use it. I think that kind of makes sense. If you have a bike share system and you look around and it's only tourists using the bike share, then locals, that's the way we think in cities. We don't want to do what the tourists are doing. We want to have our civic pride and do the things that we do in the city and go to bars and restaurants where there aren't so many tourists. So looking like a tourist as you ride your bike around the city or do anything is not really appealing to many urban dwellers. So on that point, I guess the jury is out. It depends on the city and the local context. Even here in Copenhagen, the very expensive white Bikeshare bikes, you only see tourists riding them. That's really about it. Many locals don't even bother with them. I see them so rarely on the streets now. Such an incredible waste of money. It really is kind of a tourist thing. I've had many friends who are not in my industry at all, just people who know what I do. They're going, oh yeah, have you tried those tourist bikes? In the public perception for many people in Copenhagen, they're just regarded as those tourist bikes. And that's not going to get Copenhageners to get onto them. The goal here in Copenhagen for the city bike system was to get people who live here to use them, people in their neighborhoods. I mean, I read the brief when they were launching the system, it's like if your bike is flat, you can go out and grab one of these bikes and use it until you get your bike repaired. If you're coming from another Danish city to Copenhagen for a meeting, you can hop on a bike for your last mile. And then also tourists could use it when they visit our city. Now it is only really the tourists using it, except for the food delivery people. The Copenhagen Bikeshare bikes, the city bikes, and another company called Donkey Republic, free floating bikes as well. They are now offering massive discounts to food delivery people, all the people riding around with our takeaway, delivering it to our homes. That is a sign that these systems are simply not working. So they have to desperately try and get some bums on bikes, as it were, and offer a really cool discount for using them. I've spoken to some of these food delivery people and who told me about this, and they're going, yeah, I don't want to use my own bike for this. I might as well use that. It's like, I don't know, a 70 kroner a month or something. What's that, about 10 bucks? Fail. And the Donkey Republic's a private company, fine, but the city bikes, like I said, my taxpayer money at play. So yeah, a lot of thoughts about Bikeshare. Super interesting. Make them established as transport. Position them in places where people are going to use them, where it's convenient to them, not just where you can squeeze them in somewhere. And fund them like you fund buses and trains and schools and hospitals and everything else. They should just be a normal feature in absolutely every city in the world and function as an integral part of the transport system in a city.